see now a whole variety. And let me just a couple other statistics just to let you know. As we said, there's over 400,000 people with intellectual and developmental disabilities in the sheltered employment, often at sub-minimum wage. The Medicaid program pays 4 times money for segregated adult programs, $488 million, as opposed to $108 million in supported employment. So there's an incredible disincentive in the Medicaid program to move people into more supported integrated employment. And we've actually seen a decrease over the last several years of people in integrated employment. So the situation is not getting better, it's actually getting worse. What we see is a variety of issues in different kinds of settings. Certainly in the true segregated sheltered employment. One study recently by HSRI was that in 5,000 people with developmental disabilities, they made on the average of $101 a month after working 74 hours. So if you do the math, it's like $1.25 an hour for the amount of work they're doing. We even find a situation where we've actually moved people into the community, but they're still in segregated employment. So we just found out that in Missouri, at the Nevada Rehabilitation Center, even the people they moved out of that institution, there's a shelter workshop on the grounds, and the people in the community come back to the shelter workshop in the institution. So even though we move people in the community and give them integrated housing, we still can't seem to get over the gap around employment. We had a similar situation in North Dakota, where we had a young man who was living in a transitional apartment, but went back into a shelter workshop during the day for his employment. And despite the fact that he wanted to go into competitive employment, he was really stopped by the shelter workshop. My agency there in North Dakota was able to work with him, got both re-involved, got him services, and now he's on his way to a more integrated setting. But then we also have situations even when someone's in competitive or in integrated employment in certain industries, they're still, because of the sub-minimum wage, working at very low wages, way below the minimum wage. And again, we found situations like that. Now, many people in Washington know that in Washington we do policy by scandal, not because we approach things in a reasoned way based on the information we all have. Fortunately or unfortunately, in this area we have a pretty big scandal, and I think most people are familiar with Henry's turkey service out in Atlas, Iowa, which came to light now a year and a half ago, where Henry's service acted both as the employer, the representative payee for Social Security benefits, and also the housing, provided housing. And those three together was the perfect storm of abuse and exploitation. And we found that they're making about $65 a month after working 40 hours a week in really horrible working conditions and not particularly fun job. Whereas the employer was netting about $40,000 in income by taking their Social Security payments, not paying them a full wage, and also charging them for the housing, which was well below good standards. And then we also had clients who are working in an integrated setting, but as I said, are being paid well below the minimum wage and need advocacy. The other part of the sub-minimum wage, of course, is that the productivity level, what determines your rate, is up to the employer. So what is the incentive for an employer to find someone with a higher productivity level, because then they would actually have to pay more. So this is a system that exists in such a large amount, and it's just ripe for abuse. And unfortunately, we are finding all kinds of levels of abuse. We need to look then how we can really solve this problem and move this forward. And it's an intractable problem. It's not going to close overnight by any means because of the large investment in these systems. I would certainly, and we need to look almost at every federal agency because they all have a role in this. We know, for example, that IDA, the program for free and appropriate education, which is based on the concept of integration and use restricted alternative, is probably one of the major funnels for children, for transition children into sheltered employment. So the very program that was created to educate children with disabilities is the program that's sort of sending these kids into this kind of dead-end situation. We know that, as I said earlier, Medicaid and some of the funding programs of Medicaid create this kind of funding incentive for states and agencies. We've had one agency that told us when they tried to end their shelter employment, they found out they were going to lose about $700,000 to $800,000 in Medicaid reimbursement, and that was the end of that discussion. They just really couldn't afford to survive. Department of Labor has the responsibility, the Wage and Hour Division has the responsibility to do the oversight. They haven't had the resources, even with the new resources. They have limited issues in terms of jurisdiction and whether they can go in there. State agencies, Department of Labor, and disabilities agencies have been very lax, one of the reasons why the turkey farm situation existed. Rehab, which has ended this as Mr. Monet back there has said that this is not a successful closure. On the other hand, is not going into the shelter deployments, offering rehabilitation services at the level we think they should be doing. So we've also approached the Department of Justice to sort of begin to look at this whole area of shelter deployment as a violation of Olmstead. Now, it is interesting that this has been a week of ADA celebrations. I think we're all a little bleary-eyed from the number of events and parties. And yet this is clearly the area where the ADA, I think, has failed the most. In general, employment of people with disabilities, but in particular this area. With the Olmstead decision, which says that isolation and segregation of people with disabilities is discrimination, we have an opportunity, I think, to try to bring that principle and that concept to sheltered employment. So what we need to do, I think, take advantage of the scandal, to try to move policy, to try to take advantage of the data that so clearly shows that this is a huge problem, to use the examples of positive work that can be done. We need to start looking at how we can start to move to phase out the system. I would start by enforcement, because there'll be for quite some time to come large numbers of people with disabilities in these settings. We need to make sure that while they're there, and as we begin to move the phase these places out, that people are, there's good enforcement, that the productivity levels are being reviewed by outside people to make sure that that people are being evaluated appropriately, to make sure that we find people with no certificates, even though they are paying some minimum wage. And we just have to make sure that people are not getting the triple abuse of bad housing and also their Social Security benefits being taken. From there, I think we need to start closing the door of the places that funnel people into sheltered employment, such as IDA. We need to look at Medicaid reimbursement policies and work with CMS to make sure that they really are moving that direction. And we hear a lot about the year of community living. That should include integrated competitive employment as well as a place to live. I would certainly, we did for many years have a sub-minimum, a floor, where you could not, where people had to pay at least a certain amount of money. That was removed in 1986. I'm not quite sure why. I wasn't, I was around actually. Why did I let that happen? Can't say that it's not someone else. But it seems that we certainly considered that, but it's ironic that when we raised the issue of possibly setting no less than half the minimum wage, and we dropped it to a third, we did get screams and howls from the provider saying that they couldn't possibly survive if we paid everybody in the sheltered workshop 1/3 of the minimum wage. Now, when we checked the 990s and so what their salaries were, it seems like they were doing quite well. So we really have to, approach this, I think, in a phased way, protecting the people that are there now, and begin to close the door so that new people don't come in, and then begin to provide the supports and the funding so these kinds of programs can grow and move people into